My name is Ethan, and I'm an ordinary office worker. To make my commute easier, I chose to move into an old apartment building. This building, made of concrete, is a bit dated but still sturdy. I like the solid feel of it, which gives me a sense of security. The neighbors here seem quite normal. They smile and nod in the stairwell, and sometimes we chat briefly. The elderly couple downstairs goes for a walk every morning, holding hands on their way back, which warms my heart. The young couple next door often walks their dog after dinner. Whenever the dog sees me, it wags its tail and comes over to greet me, and I can't resist petting it. In the first few nights after moving in, I noticed that the window of the apartment across from mine is always lit. Although I've never seen anyone in that apartment, the light makes me feel like someone lives there. The curtains are half drawn, and I can only see a corner of the room, with the vague outline of some furniture, nothing unusual. Every evening when I return home from work, I habitually look at the window across the street before going inside to do my own things. This evening was no different. I got home, changed into comfortable clothes, made a simple dinner, and ate by the window. The light in the opposite window was still on, and through the half-drawn curtain, I could almost feel the presence of life inside. After dinner, I cleaned up the dishes and sat on the couch to read for a while. As the night grew deeper, I closed my book and walked over to the window to take one last look. The light was still on, and the faint shadows behind the curtain gave the impression that someone was living there. This feeling was comforting, helping me find a bit of warmth in this unfamiliar environment. Lying in bed, I listened to the soft footsteps coming from downstairs, as if a neighbor was taking an evening stroll. Occasionally, I could hear the faint laughter of children. These sounds made me feel at ease, and gradually, I fell asleep to these small, reassuring noises. That night, I worked late at the office, and by the time I finished my tasks, it was already midnight. Dragging my tired body back to the apartment, I noticed that the window across from mine was still lit. The light shone through the half-drawn curtain, almost as if it held some mysterious allure. But I was too exhausted to think much about it. I quickly washed up and went to bed. The next morning, my alarm woke me up. My eyes were still half closed, but I had to get on with my day. After getting ready, I walked out the door and ran into my neighbor, Zach. He enjoyed gardening on his balcony, and every time I left for work, I would see him busy tending to his plants. "Morning, Ethan." Zach waved, looking somewhat troubled. "Morning. What's up? You look a bit worried," I replied. Zach sighed and complained, "Last night, while I was watering the plants on my balcony, I saw a young woman across the street changing clothes. She thought I was spying on her and called me a pervert. It took a lot of explaining before she reluctantly believed me, but she was still pretty upset." I couldn't help but laugh a little, patting his shoulder. "Don't worry about it. Anyone could have a misunderstanding like that. Just be more careful next time." Zach nodded, forcing a smile. "Thanks, Ethan. You're right." After reassuring him a bit more, I hurried off to work. The day was busy and fulfilling, making me temporarily forget about those small issues. However, when I returned home that evening, Zach's complaint about the girl came back to my mind. Could the person living across from me be a young woman? To avoid any similar misunderstandings, I decided not to look at the opposite window again. But people are strange creatures. The more you tell yourself not to think about something, the more curious you become. Lying in bed, I couldn't stop picturing the window across the street, the light, and that half-drawn curtain. Who was she? Why was her light always on so late? I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. The room across seemed to have an invisible pull, making it impossible to ignore. Finally, in a state of confusion and curiosity, I drifted off to sleep. One weekend, I planned to go to a nearby supermarket to buy some household items. On the way, I passed by the building behind my apartment and couldn't help but take a closer look. This building appeared more modern than mine, but the residents seemed particularly keen on privacy. Each window had its curtains tightly drawn, making it nearly impossible to see inside. Occasionally, I encountered some residents, but they hurried by without engaging in conversation or nodding in greeting. As I passed one unit, I suddenly felt someone staring at me. I looked up to see a young woman standing on her balcony, her eyes following me intently. Feeling a bit awkward, I gave her a polite nod. To my surprise, her face turned red, and she quickly nodded back before hurriedly retreating from the balcony. Back at my apartment, I was about to relax when my neighbor, Zach, knocked on my door. "Ethan, come over for dinner tonight. I've made some delicious dishes," he invited enthusiastically. I smiled and agreed. Zach was a warm-hearted guy, and every time he invited me over, I could count on a sumptuous meal. When I arrived at his place, it was as bustling as ever. Zach was busy in the kitchen, and upon seeing me, he asked me to help him collect the laundry from the balcony. "Are you making me do chores?" I joked. Zach laughed. "Just a little help, it'll be quick." Resigned, I walked to the balcony and started gathering the clothes. Suddenly, I noticed a familiar figure on the opposite balcony. It was the young woman again, hanging laundry. When she saw me, she froze for a moment, then quickly ducked behind the railing. I found it amusing. She wasn't changing clothes this time, so why was she hiding? She peeked out at me, her face still slightly flushed, then ducked back down. Shaking my head, I continued collecting the laundry, but my curiosity about this strange neighbor grew. After I finished, I returned to the living room where Zach had already set the table. "Come on, Ethan, dig in. I've made your favorite, braised pork," Zach called out. Sitting down, we started eating and chatting about our lives. Zach always had plenty to talk about, from gardening to various everyday stories, making the atmosphere relaxed and enjoyable. Suddenly, Zach paused, took a sip of beer, and couldn't help but gripe, "I just don't get it. That girl called me a pervert when she saw me on the balcony, but today, you go collect some laundry, and she blushes and hides. What kind of world is this? I look like a pervert, and you look harmless? Ethan, do you think I look ugly?" I laughed and pretended to scrutinize him closely. Zach, with his pale skin from working odd hours and the ever-present dark circles under his eyes, did look a bit eerie, especially when he smiled at people without realizing it. I could somewhat understand why the girl misunderstood him. Seeing Zach's expectant look, I decided to highlight his best features. "Your eyes are quite large, and your eyebrows are well-groomed. I'd say you're a pretty handsome guy." Zach laughed, seemingly satisfied with my diplomatic answer. A few nights later, I was getting ready for bed when there was a sudden knock on the door. Opening it, I saw Zach standing there with an embarrassed look on his face. "Ethan, I forgot my keys. The landlord and the locksmith are probably asleep by now. Could I crash here for the night?" He smiled sheepishly. Although I thought to myself, "So you feel okay bothering me then," I couldn't turn him away seeing his pitiful expression. After preparing some toiletries for him, I made him a makeshift bed on the floor right next to mine. "Thanks, Ethan. I'm really sorry for the trouble," Zach said gratefully. "It's okay, just get some rest," I replied, yawning as I lay back down. Just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard Zach's voice, "Ethan, are you asleep?" I grumbled internally, "I was until you woke me up," but sleepily responded, "What's up?" "The light from across the street is too bright." "I can't sleep," Zach complained. Perhaps it's in my nature to try to solve others' problems, so I started chatting with him. But due to my drowsiness, our conversation soon became nonsensical. "Ethan, have you ever hired a locksmith? Are they expensive?" "Oh. I've eaten one before. It's pretty cheap. That girl from before keeps looking my way now. I got so mad, I called her a pervert. By the way, Ethan, what did you eat to get so handsome? Fried rice. I like fried rice. We continued talking in the dark about trivial things, and time slipped away. By 3 a.m., the light across the street was still on. Zach suddenly asked, "Ethan, have you ever seen that light go off?" I thought back and realized I never had. "No, I haven't," I replied. Zach was stunned. "That's such a waste of electricity." I found it strange too, but I was too tired to dwell on it. "Yeah, it's weird. But we should sleep now, we have work tomorrow." I turned over and finally fell asleep again. The next morning, I woke up to find Zach curled up next to me. Surprised, I asked, "Why did you climb up here?" Zach looked frightened. He whispered, "Last night, I felt so cold even with the blanket. I kept looking at the window across the street and it freaked me out. I just wanted some comfort." Not sure what to say, I reassured him, "Don't overthink it. You're probably just scaring yourself. Take it easy at work today, and we'll get a good night's rest later." Zach nodded, and we quickly got ready and headed out for work. This night left me with many questions, but life goes on, and maybe someday, the answers will slowly reveal themselves. One weekend morning, I was enjoying a cup of hot coffee when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find the young couple from next door standing there with their golden retriever, Kaka. "Ethan, we're planning to go on a trip for a few days. Could you help take care of Kaka?" they asked, smiling brightly. I looked down at Kaka, with her shiny golden fur and warm, curious eyes looking up at me. I had always liked dogs, especially Kaka, who I often petted and who seemed particularly fond of me. Seeing such an adorable dog, I naturally agreed without hesitation. "Of course, I'd love to take care of Kaka," I replied with a smile, reaching out to pet Kaka's head. She nuzzled my hand gently, appearing very friendly. "That's great, thank you so much, Ethan. We won't be gone too long." "Thanks again for helping out," the young couple said gratefully, handing me Kaka's leash, some dog food, and a few toys before quickly leaving. I brought Kaka back to my apartment, thinking to myself that someday, when my life is more stable, I'd like to have such a lovely dog of my own. Kaka followed me obediently, looking very well behaved. I poured her some water and dog food, watching her eat happily, feeling a warm sensation in my heart. That evening, I planned to let Kaka sleep in the living room, setting up a comfortable dog bed for her. However, when I returned to my room to go to bed, Kaka had climbed onto my bed. She nuzzled at the edge of the bed, then quietly lay down. I smiled helplessly, deciding she was clean enough to stay, and let her sleep on the bed. In the middle of the night, Kaka suddenly got up and stared out the window, occasionally letting out a low growl. Finding it strange, I got up and brought her back to bed, but she continued to pace anxiously around the room. Thinking she might need to go to the bathroom, I took her outside, but she didn't go. Instead, she lay down in the living room, occasionally glancing towards my bedroom, but refused to come back inside. I patted her head and whispered, "Kaka, what's wrong? Are you feeling unwell?" Kaka just let out a soft whimper and still wouldn't return to the room. I ended up setting up her bed in the living room and let her lie down comfortably. Returning to my room, I couldn't shake off a slight sense of unease. Why was Kaka acting this way? What was out there that made her so anxious? This chapter left me with many questions, and as I lay back down, the feeling of unease lingered. What could possibly be out there, making Kaka so distressed? The next day, I decided to take Kaka for a walk around the back of the apartment building, hoping to see the girl from last night again. Kaka bounced along happily beside me. As we approached the building, I spotted the girl. Perhaps because Kaka was with me, she didn't run away this time but looked at us with a curious expression. "Hello, I saw you the other day." "I live in the building across the street," I said, taking the initiative to greet her. Kaka wagged her tail cheerfully. "Hello, I'm Sarah," she replied with a slight smile and a nod. I'm Ethan, and this is Kaka. I introduced us, and Kaka gave a little bark, as if saying hello. Sarah, I wanted to ask if you know anything about the apartment across from mine. Their light is always on, and I've never seen it turned off, I said, my curiosity growing stronger. Sarah frowned slightly and replied, that apartment belongs to a couple, but they've been away for a while now. It's strange that the light is always on. I'll mention it to the landlord. I nodded, feeling a bit reassured but still uneasy. A few days later, I was heading home with some groceries when I saw Sarah and a man standing outside the building. Curious, I walked over. Ethan, this is the landlord, Sarah introduced. Then she explained, we asked the landlord about the couple. They haven't paid last month's rent and haven't been in contact. We're about to go up and check. Do you want to come with us? The landlord added. I nodded and followed them upstairs. We rang the doorbell several times but got no response. The landlord took out his key and unlocked the door. As soon as the door opened, a strong stench of decay hit us, and a swarm of rats and cockroaches scurried out. Sarah screamed and stepped back, refusing to go inside. I felt hesitant and awkward about entering, so I stayed outside the door. The landlord pinched his nose and bravely stepped inside. Standing at the doorway, I felt uneasy and unsure about going in. Sarah, standing next to me, looked pale, sensing something wrong. We whispered about the situation. Suddenly, we heard the landlord let out a loud scream. His legs gave way, and he collapsed to the ground, his face ashen, unable to speak from terror. Seeing this, my heart pounded. I couldn't ignore it any longer and rushed into the apartment to check. Inside, the place was a mess, with debris and food scraps scattered everywhere. Rats and cockroaches scurried into the corners. I covered my nose, fighting the urge to gag, and continued deeper into the apartment. This chapter left me with a deep sense of foreboding as I witnessed the chaos inside. When I walked into the room that had always been lit, the sight before me was unforgettable. In the corner of the room, a woman lay curled up on the floor, clutching her stomach. She looked like she had been dead for a long time. Her skin was gray, her eyes tightly shut, and her face bore an expression of lingering pain. Half of the room was in complete disarray, with debris scattered everywhere, as if a terrible struggle had taken place. This scene was etched deeply into my mind. I had never imagined that the other half of the room behind the curtain could look like this. The bright light had always masked such a horrific secret. Soon, the apartment was surrounded by people, and the police arrived. They sealed off the scene and began their investigation but did not disclose any details to the other residents. Nevertheless, people were buzzing with speculation. Some said the man had killed her, while others pitied her tragic fate. Back home, I couldn't help but recall Kaka's unusual behavior. Perhaps she had sensed something was wrong. Standing by my window, I looked over at the now dark room across the street, feeling a deep sadness. This place had hidden so much pain and tragedy. A few days later, Zach visited, bringing news about the couple. Ethan, I heard that couple was very much in love, Zach said, sitting on the couch with a somber expression. What happened to them? I asked, the unease in my heart rising again. The guy cheated on her while she was pregnant and even asked her to have an abortion. She refused, and they had a fierce argument. He ended up hurting her, Zach sighed, his eyes filled with pity. Hearing this, I recalled the woman's curled-up position on the floor, a posture protecting her stomach. Even in her final moments, she tried to protect her unborn child. That's so cruel, I said quietly, feeling a pang of sorrow. Zach nodded and fell silent for a moment. Yes, it's really hard to accept such things. I looked out the window at the room that used to be brightly lit, now plunged into darkness. It had once been a testament to their love but had turned into a scene of tragedy. Kaka's strange behavior might have been an early sign of this disaster. As night fell, I lay in bed, my mind unable to find peace. The image of the woman and the pain she endured kept resurfacing in my thoughts. I reminded myself that life is full of unknown variables, and all we can do is maintain a warm and kind heart in the face of adversity. With a heavy heart, I slowly drifted off to sleep that night.